There's an amazing quote by Imam Ali that I always think of, and that is, do not parent your children the way you were parented, because they are created for a different generation.
A lot of my own friends, I was very surprised when I asked this question, that would you beat up your own child? And they were like, yeah. I'm like, why? They're like, because if I had not been beaten up, मैं सीधा ना होता, as the thing goes.
Being harsh with your kids, or what we call power assertion, that could be yelling, that could be hitting, is very detrimental to child development, brain development. Kids feel anxious. Now it works, but what are you losing out on? So I always tell parents, okay, you did this, you hit your child, you yelled at your child, did it work? Yes. What happened to the connection you had with your child? And now your child is fearful of you, they're anxious, and later on, they're going to come back and think about that.
Yeah. So a lot of times, the personality of the children come out very different of what they are in front of their parents and what they are in front of their, friends. Because with their friends, they can be more natural, they can be more, in their zone, in their more, natural habitat. But when they go home, it's sakhti and anxiety and, pressure and all of that. So, like, in my opinion, social emotional learning cannot happen if the children are not in the playground or with their peers and all of that. So it essentially can't happen at home, because obviously, like, in home, there's too much discipline.
In the West, you see a lot of families that live hours away from other relatives, or maybe more than that. The one thing I've seen in Pakistan is families are closer. So there is this once a year, there's a lot of connection, and even more than that. So there's a lot of extended family.
Yeah.
That is a good thing for kids and for families, because you feel connected and you have more than one adult that you can turn to.
Okay.
I see that lacking in the US a lot.
I see a lot of people having, psychological problems and all of that. And a lot of them blame it on childhood experiences, on how they were treated by their parents. While I do agree that is the case, I just don't know why. Because I mean, there's so basically you grow up by 18, right? And someone who is in their 40s or 50s still complain about the fact what happened maybe like 30 years ago, 40 years ago.
Some of the general things that come up are a lot of stress about grades.
Okay.
And the parents are pushing kids to do something they don't want to do. You go into medicine, go into engineering, this and that. The kids want to do something different. A lot of stress about grades. And I always try to address the parents. Obviously, it's the parents' own fears.
Yeah.
Their own, something's going on. Why do you want your, what's the thing about grades and all that?
Yeah.
So I see a lot of that. I see teens that are then, if they're not connected to the parents, and teenage time is one where parents have to be more connected.
Yeah.
And parents generally become a bit stricter about grades. So then you have the disconnect. Then kids are turning to things they shouldn't be turning to, like maybe doing things with friends that they should have, peer pressure, there's bullying, there's substances, there's all that stuff. I am a child and adolescent psychologist, but and I'll discuss where that journey started. I've also been a teacher.
Okay.
I'm also a mom. So there's a lot of things that have led me to this. But yes, so right now I practice as a therapist.
Okay.
And a researcher specifically with child and adolescent psychology.
Okay. And so what got you into this field? Like, why choose this?
When I started teaching kids, it really, something just kind of like lit up in me, and where I could see that their history, trauma, if they had any, and child development were absolutely affecting their day-to-day life, their learning. And I could see that. And I was in a school that was, I think, in an area that wasn't, I think it was more of a low-income area in Miami. And it was an eye-opener for me. And I think that really got me into thinking, wait a minute, I really want to study psychology. And specifically, I want to study child development. And the one thing for me, I think even now, is if we could fix things early on, if we could really work with kids early, and we could prevent so much. I think that's the main thing.
Yeah, for sure. So, like, this has been a question that I've been asking myself for a long while now, because I see a lot of people having, psychological problems and all of that. And a lot of them blame it on childhood experiences, on how they were treated by their parents. while I do agree that that is the case, I just don't know why. Because I mean, this so basically you grow up by 18, right? And someone who is in their 40s or 50s still complain about the fact what happened maybe like 30 years ago, 40 years ago. Why is it so important? Why is childhood so important even when you're adult?
Why is childhood so important? You're laying the foundation, you're laying the neural networks for attachment, for relationships, for connection. If that's not done the right way, it's like if you're building a house and you don't get the framework and the foundation right, everything's going to kind of move around when there's a big storm.
Yeah.
So what happens with children is that early connection, and we're talking newborn and 0 to 3 being majority of the neurons, connecting and forming. If they're not getting the right experiences, they're not getting the right neural framework down. And then even after that, they're learning how to socially relate to others. If a parent is harsh or criticizing, what is that telling them about themselves? Am I loved? Am I accepted? Am I not loved? And I see this a lot even in adults and teens where I'll be speaking to a 30-year-old or a 40-year-old and they'll say, well, all this happened to me, but why is it that now it's bothering me? And my answer to that is that because you're ready to process it.
Yeah.
So we're not ready to process it when we're children because we have to survive, we have to go to school, we have to do so many different things. But then later when we're in a secure place, wherever that is in your development at 18, 20, 25, and you're in a secure, positive, loving relationship, then you're like, wait a minute, this stuff is coming up. And then I think it's not too late to process that when you're ready.
So how do you sort of process it is my question.
There's different ways. There's different, one way to process it is with a professional, if you have a therapist who is trauma informed, who can recognize that the trauma is connected to how you're feeling and doing now. There is journaling. There's a lot of post-traumatic growth exercises. There's what we call I forgot the name of it.
It's okay.
It's sort of writing your own narrative and changing it.
Okay.
So you go back to childhood and you narrate what happened to you so that you can accept it, process it, and then change that narrative to say, talking to your inner child, basically. So there's a lot of inner child work, there's journaling. Then on the other hand, there's things like EMDR, which is processing your trauma, also through your brain, and also there's hypnosis.
And these days, there's also a lot of work on psychedelics as well. I don't know if you've heard.
I have heard some of that. I will not comment on that because I don't know the research.
Yeah.
But I've definitely heard a lot of things about certain
substances,
natural substances that can do. I don't know much about that. But yes, I've heard that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So you've been working with Pakistani families for how long now?
I've been in Pakistan for 5 years now.
Okay.
A lot longer than I had thought I would be here.
Okay.
But I've really, I came here, I'm from the US, but I've lived in Dubai and Kuwait. And so when we thought of moving to Pakistan, I'm ready for the
Experience.
for the journey and the experience.
Yeah.
And it's taken us to a place where we love it so much now that my kids don't want to go back. So I've been here 5 years working with Pakistani families.
Okay.
A lot of things are similar. Humans are humans. They need connection and all that. But a lot of things have been very different. The way that families are set up, the way that connections are set up, extended family plays a role, joint families. So that has been different.
Okay. So, if you could elaborate a little on the differences of a Pakistani family and a family abroad. I mean, obviously there are some things that are good here when it comes to like at least providing a nucleus family image, if it's not that great anyway. And you don't see that in the West anyway. What are the differences and what sort of traumas are we facing here? Like as children or as families?
So obviously in the West, there's more, as we've come into modern society, we're moving away from living in villages and connected to families. So in the West, you see a lot of families that live hours away from other relatives or maybe more than that. The one thing I've seen in Pakistan is families are closer. So there is this once a year, there's a lot of connection, and even more than that. So there's a lot of extended family.
Yeah.
That is a good thing for kids and for families because you feel connected and you have more than one adult that you can turn to.
Okay.
I see that lacking in the US a lot. So you have mom and dad, or you have the nuclear family, but mom and dad are working.
Yeah.
And uncles and aunts are too far away. Grandparents are far away. So what I've seen here is that kids do have that, a couple of more adults.
Okay.
That is a good thing. Where it gets a little tricky is that everyone has different ideas about development and then child development. And then the parents want to do one thing, children want to do another, but the grandparents have the final say. And what are the neighbors going to say? What is your cousins, what are they going to say?
Yeah.
So that idea of and we are a collectivist society, the US is not. We are definitely much more collectivist. So we care about the whole image of the family. So that can be good and can be bad as well.
So, so when it comes to joint families and, the impact of grandparents and all of that, that I work in the education industry with Javed and everything. So, a lot of times we get, a lot of times people see as they know what education is or what parenting is in a sense. I mean, they don't have a degree, they don't really learn much about them, but because they saw their parents, everyone thinks that, they know what the experience is like, and they know that, even if they were beaten up or whatever, they deserved it. A lot of my own friends, I was very surprised when I asked this question, that would you beat up your own child? And they were like, yeah. I'm like, why? They're like, because if I had not been beaten up, मैं सीधा ना होता, as the thing goes. So I'm talking about people who are really educated, with people who watch good content, people who are exposed to the right things. So I mean, what's this notion? How can we change it? And do you think beating up is fine?
So there's an amazing quote by Imam Ali that I always think of, and that is, do not parent your children the way you were parented, because they are created for a different generation. So we have to, as parents, look forward and say, okay, I may have done something wrong, but now that I know better, I should do better. We parent as we were parented, unless we work on it. And we know that the research shows that, being harsh with your kids, or what we call power assertion, that could be yelling, that could be hitting, is very detrimental to child development, brain development. Kids feel anxious. Now it works, but what are you losing out on? So I always tell parents, okay, you did this, you hit your child, you yelled at your child, did it work? Yes. What happened to the connection you had with your child? And now your child is fearful of you, they're anxious, and later on, they're going to come back and think about that.
Yeah.
So why not just nurture that connection in a positive way? There's so many other things you can do besides these techniques. There's so many other positive techniques that you could use.
I think those positive techniques take a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of patience, because if a child is nagging or is fixated on something, and if you slap him, that loop might break, and so I mean, it works in that way. The other way would be, you're talking to them, or you're trying to distract them with other ways, and they're still screaming, or using their hands in some way or whatever. So is that the only reason why people don't go towards better techniques?
That's one reason. So it is easier to just yell or hit or kind of do a timeout or anything like that, because it's easy and it works immediately. The problem is that if parents take the time and understand what the long-term consequences for that be, they would make some effort. Yeah. They would not do it. They would. And also, when you're telling a child, don't do this, otherwise this will happen, and it's a very harsh thing, they won't do it, but they're not internalizing the reason why. I'm not going to do this because mom or dad might hit me. Versus if you explain it to them or you use a different technique, they will actually connect that. And talking about why should you not, whatever it is, do something like whatever they're doing. If you explain it to them, they actually process it better and internalize it.
Okay.
So I think it's just a matter of parents realizing, hey, there's a much better way that goes further.
Yeah. Okay, so how do you approach families that that one of their children may be suffering from autism or ADHD or dyslexia? Um, I know it for a fact this is a very sensitive topic.
Yes.
A lot of people in Pakistan don't even want to get tested, even if so. A lot of parents are coming to Utopia. We sometimes identify because we're not professionals when it comes to identifying that, and usually we we refer it to you because obviously we the only like good child psychologist that we know is just sitting right in front of me. So, but we do. Working with children for so long, we do understand that this is perhaps not normal or not on the scale of what we call normal, essentially. But a lot of times those parents don't want to get tested. They just say like you don't know what you're talking about and all of that, and my child is fine. How do you break that? How do you break the news to them? Is it tough? Do parents take it the right way? Like, kya process kya hota hai?
So I can tell you that being in this field for almost 18 years, every time I have to do that, it's very hard for me. Every family is different. There's a lot of hand-holding that goes on. And I always gauge. First, I have to see where the parents are in the journey. They might be at a stage where they are kind of ready to hear, not ready to hear. And so I will wait and I will guide them gently through that. But when they are ready, I will share that with them in a very hopeful way, positive way, and give them resources. But it is something that isn't easy for them, and it isn't easy for a professional because I try not to diagnose until I'm 100% sure, because there's a lot of things that mimic. So, for example, ADHD. A lot of parents will come and say, my child can't sit still, they can't do this, they can't focus. How old is he? He's 4. Sounds like a 4-year-old.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things that mimic that. Trauma, symptoms of trauma mimic a lot of these things. So you have to really rule out a lot of things first.
Okay.
And then we do some more work. And so it takes a while. And I think that on that journey, we develop a relationship where they trust me and I kind of gauge where they are.
Okay.
So it's a process. Every family is different. But yes, there is a lot of denial, then there's anger, then there's acceptance. It's definitely a process.
Okay. So how do you work with them? Like with children? Like is there like a scale or something where you can sort of help them out? And like if you could explain if any of these children with ADHD or dyslexia or autism, I know that all of these are different problems, but can they really become functioning adults when they grow up?
They can. So they are different. So autism is neurodevelopmental. So is ADHD. Mood disorders are a little different. We have scales that we use internationally that are accepted. So for example, for autism, we have a rating scale. We have an observation scale that we use. Those are kind of like just to put it on paper and record. But every child's so different that we do informal testing where we observe over a longer period, and we also observe them at home and at school.
Yeah.
So there are some formal scales that we use that are just, as clinicians, we know how to use them. We do that testing. And then there's a lot of informal things. And then also a lot of explaining to the family how to change. Can people be functional? Can these kids be functional? Absolutely. I think they just need the right support.
Okay. And I mean, it would also be dependent on how, like in case of autism, especially like if they're like high up on the scale, then I think that they might not be able to become.
There's so in autism, there's 3 levels. And so level 1 is the most high functioning. Level 2 is you need more support. Level 3, you need the most support.
Yeah.
Some children may not be verbal. So, right, they would need a higher level of, but some kids will amaze us, even though if they're higher on the scale, they will amaze us with their abilities, and they may not be exactly like other children, but they have their own strengths.
Okay. And so like, how do you put your research and neuroscience into your approach to dealing with children and their families?
So I have had to go back and really study some of the neuroscience and the research that's come out in the last 10 years. There's Bruce Perry, Dan Siegel, a lot of amazing neuroscience research that's come out even after I didn't finish my training. So I've had to go back and look at that. I incorporate that by and a trauma-informed approach as well. So I go do the trainings, I look through the research, and I try to see, okay, and most importantly, I connect with other professionals that I've worked with, that in the US and here as well. What's working for you? What's not working? What are these new techniques? So we're always trying to find something newer that's backed by research.
So we've talked about trauma and autism and ADHD. What about social and emotional development? Where like even very normal children are facing some sort of a social, emotional
Absolutely
situation. Even when in the case of the teenage brain that we were talking about off camera, I mean, at that time, what I saw on the one of the documentaries was that at that time the only thing that really matters is social sort of acceptance, like acceptance from friends, from your peers in school or class and whatever. And there's really no way of breaking that, because literally your brain is only asking for one thing. It's essentially acceptance. So how do you work on that? What's your approach? And if there's any parent who's watching, what should they do at home?
Wow. Social emotional learning is, I think, the most important thing that parents should be doing for all kids. This is kids that are neurotypical or divergent or anything like that. If you're doing social emotional skills early on, those skills lay the foundation for so many things. So for example, even before kids are social at 2, we teach parents to co-regulate, which it means you're teaching them how to regulate their emotions, but they're too little to do that. So you have to step in.
Okay.
Hold space for their feelings, validate their feeling, give them space to be upset, angry, sad, frustrated, and then model calmness and model the regulation. If we can do this at an early age, and I think Edopia is doing it, there's lots of schools that are doing it, it has been shown to be a better predictor of achievement and success and happiness and well-being than IQ or anything else.
Okay.
How we connect with others, how we regulate our own emotions, how we get on with peers. I think that, and if we lay that kindness, compassion, empathy.
Sharing,
yeah. If we can lay those things down early, so super, super important, I think. And I think that now, I think it's catching on. There's lots of books for parents on it. There's workbooks. But children do need that on a daily basis at school.
Okay. And what should schools do? Like, I mean, should there be classes there? I mean, like, we know what we do, but like in a more traditional school, you don't really have the time or the resources to, like, if you have like 8 periods and all of those periods are like fixated on academics or covering the course and all of that. Where do they really find the time for that? Because I remember we used to have like 20 minutes of break in the entire day. Yeah. And I was going to like a very big school and, good quality education out there. We had 20 minutes. In 20 minutes, we had to go to the washroom, have food, play, and, gossip or whatever, and then come back, right? And so the most of the social, emotional learning was happening in class, right? Because so the backbenchers were talking and, throwing things and all of that. So, like, what should we do? Right?
Here's what's happened. Here's the problem with most schools. They are rich in cognitive stuff, learning, thinking. They're pushing all the brain stuff, which is just academics. They're forgetting that. They're forgetting the social emotional piece. If we could make schools more socially connected, allowing kids to have longer recess, allowing kids to have more time to play, we would have kids that are better adjusted, less stressed, happier.
Yeah.
Happy to go to school. There's some schools in Islamabad that I've seen that are making 5-year-olds write, do spelling exercises, dictation, and then calling parents if their kids are not able to do that.
Yeah.
Instead of pushing 8 periods, if you could just take one out and do SEL and cover amazing topics like kindness and gratitude and how to talk, what makes a good friend, what makes a bad friend. How would that change kids? The next generation would be so wonderful, so much more. They would understand that. They would hear that from school, because parents aren't equipped to do that all the time.
Yeah, I think they don't really have the time as well, and also the fact that So I remember when I was little, a lot of younger rather. Right English.
We're not going to talk about age.
So when I was younger, the constant complaint that my teachers had for me was that he's very smart. He picks up stuff very quickly, but he's very careless. Number one, and number two, he talks a lot. Right. So my parents were like, no, he doesn't talk at home. Like, what are you even saying? He's such a quiet child at home. Right. And they're like, no, you don't know, because when he's with his friends, he's talking a lot. So they couldn't recognize it. They couldn't see, if we work on this, if we work on him being talkative, he can perhaps have a podcast channel later on. They didn't know that. Yeah. But I'm just saying, like, so a lot of times the personality of the children come out very different of what they are in front of their parents and what they are in front of their friends, because with their friends they can be more natural, they can be more in their zone, in their more natural habitat. But when they go home, it's sakhti and anxiety and pressure and all of that. So like in my opinion, social emotional learning cannot happen if the children are not in the playground or with their peers and all of that. So it essentially can't happen at home, because obviously, like, in home there's too much discipline.
Well, I think that social emotional learning primarily happens in social settings, right? School, playground, football class. It could happen at home if it didn't have all those things you mentioned, sakhti and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So there are kids that, let's say the home is inviting, parents talk to them, they engage with them. Those kids can do a lot of social emotional stuff at home, and those kids are generally more well-rounded. They feel safe and connected at home. If you do not feel safe and connected at home, then you've only got school and your friends. And that's where you're going to be yourself, be okay. Maybe your parents don't want you to be talkative. Maybe they want you to be quiet and study all the time.
Yeah.
So it depends on the home environment.
Okay. And okay, so let's talk about trauma. What are the different types of trauma that a family can face in terms of like children and themselves, like adults as well? How do you work with them? And like, how long would it essentially take to like sort of bring them out of it?
So trauma is defined by your subjective experience. So I cannot tell you something was traumatic or not traumatic for you. Something for one family could be not so traumatic, and for some could be very traumatic. Even, moving countries or schools can be traumatic for a child. Being bullied could be traumatic. And then, of course, there's more serious things. Trauma disrupts development.
Okay.
We know that from neuroscience research. So, but it depends on when the trauma happened. If a trauma happens earlier on in your life, it disrupts major attachment and major that's the time your brain is growing. So we have to first figure out when the trauma happened, and then go back, and what we do is we go to that period. So to say the trauma happened between 1 and 2 years of age, that's the age where we need connection, we need love, we need physical touch. We would then try to provide that to the child, even if they're 4 or 5.
Okay.
We'd go back and try to give them that.
Okay.
It's not going to be 100% because the brain has grown now. We go back and do that. That can be through play, that can be through nature, that can be through activities or love. And then we teach parents how to kind of do that.
Okay.
But of course, every trauma is different. So we have to see how severe it was and what was happening.
How do you gauge if a child, how would you know that a child is experiencing trauma? Like they can't explain it. There might be some behavior changes. I understand that, but like, how do you diagnose it is my question.
So trauma is one of the areas that there's still so much research. We don't actually have a scale to.
Okay.
There's a couple of scales, but they're not clinically that relevant.
Okay.
Some of the things we look for in a child are changes in behavior. A lot of children regress. So you have a child who's 4 or 5, they're potty trained and everything, but all of a sudden they're bedwetting again.
Okay.
They regress. They go back developmentally.
Okay.
That's one thing. Changes in mood, changes in sleep and appetite. So we look for that. Those are kind of signs that something is not right. Something's not going in the right way. So then you kind of have to explore where that's coming from.
How do children sort of like open up in front of like a professional or whatever? Must take like a lot of time, no, for the child to like really talk about And sometimes they're just too small to like really explain what's going on inside there. How do you manage that?
Children are actually not that hard to engage if you form a connected, loving, warm connection. So the way that I was trained and the way most professionals do is we don't talk about the trauma right away, obviously,
Okay.
because you have to have a connection first. So let's say a child there was a trauma. We don't jump in and do therapy in the traditional sense. We form a bond first. And so with children, I wouldn't sit and do something and I wouldn't question them like you and me are sitting here talking. It wouldn't be like that.
Yeah.
I would sit side by side and focus on a game or a toy,
Okay.
build a connection where we are together and I'm interested in what they're doing. Then back off, let them play alone, and then come back again.
Okay.
That series of connections that are nice and warm and will build up the connection overall.
Okay.
So once they do that, then depending on the age, we use dolls and toys, drawing, coloring to talk about trauma. Some kids can't talk about it, so they draw it out and they role play it with dolls and stuff.
Okay.
Or with a house, a doll house. Older kids, they will then talk about it or draw it. But we never push them to talk about it, only when they're ready.
Okay. So that's really interesting. That must take a lot of time, no? Like
it does, but it does take a lot of time, but it's worth it, because if you jump in and try to fix the trauma right away and when the child's not ready, it would only backfire.
I'm sure you must be working with a lot of families. So in Pakistan, essentially, what's like the general situation when it comes to like parenting, when it comes to like dealing with these things? How do you see this? Because I think mental health and all of these things are big taboo in Pakistan anyway. So
they are. They're still taboo. I work with a lot of families. Recently, it's been interesting. I've been seeing a lot of adolescents,
okay,
preteens and teens, and a bit older. Some of the general things that come up are a lot of stress about grades.
Okay.
And the parents are pushing kids to do something they don't want to do. You go into medicine, go into engineering, this and that. The kids want to do something different. A lot of stress about grades. And I always try to address the parents. Obviously, it's the parents' own fears.
Yeah.
Their own, something's going on. Why do you want what's the thing about grades and all that?
Yeah.
So I see a lot of that. I see teens that are then, if they're not connected to the parents, and teenage time is one where parents have to be more connected.
Yeah.
And parents generally become a bit stricter about grades. So then you have the disconnect. Then kids are turning to things they shouldn't be turning to, like maybe doing things with friends that they should have peer pressure. There's bullying. There's substances. There's all that stuff. So those are some of the things I'm seeing.
Okay. So primarily you're seeing like substance abuse problems?
Because of a lack of connection.
And parental pressure, essentially.
Parental pressure, and the kids don't know how to deal with it.
Okay.
They can't come to their parents. So parents also are not listening effectively. So I tell parents, listen, don't ask questions, don't criticize, don't judge, just listen.
Okay.
And a lot of times kids will always tell me, I just want them to understand me. I want them to see me. So be curious about your child, ask questions, get to know them. Okay. Who are they as an individual, not what we want them to be.
Given the content that we are now, all of us are exposed to, I mean, is that creating newer problems that perhaps weren't there when we were growing up and all that? Because I think we didn't have a lot of information anyway. So whatever was said, and we were like, okay, yehi hoga. But now, like, even like I fear, even with Jaza, like, if I give her a wrong fact or whatever, she's gonna be like, no, you're wrong.
Should be Googling that soon.
Yeah. So how do you deal with that? And do you think that is part of the problem as well?
It is, because there is so much exposure to, with the internet and social media of things that are happening in the world. Kids have access to that. So I always tell parents, try to delay giving them that as long as you can. Obviously, we can't hold it off forever, because kids will need a phone. And now kids have phones in middle school. Before it was high school. Now all the middle school kids have phones, to put parental checks on it, and to talk about, hey, if there's anything that you see that scares you or worries you, I want you to know you can always come to me and we can always talk about it, so that they're not scared. So keeping that line of communication, keeping an eye on them, especially through the teen years, until they're old enough to understand this is okay and this is not okay. So it's definitely a very challenging time for parents. Social media has been shown to increase anxiety and depression, even more so, I think, in girls as well, body image issues and things like that.
If you don't mind me asking, could you explain why or what happens when a human body or a human brain goes into depression? Like what physical changes happen, and is it just because of some trauma or something that just didn't happen according to their plan or something, or is it something deep lying in terms of like genetics or DNA, like, or is it a mixture of all of this? How would you define that?
So depression there is a genetic component to it, just like there is for diabetes and high blood pressure,
And
because
addiction. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And because our neural networks were inherited by our parents, and your neural networks include your neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin. So if there's a dip in serotonin for some reason, you will feel sadder and a bit down.
Okay.
But so that's kind of the intrinsic part. But our environment makes up a huge chunk of that. So if we're exposed to something that we're upset about, or we feel we're not in control of our lives, or we feel stressed, then that can also trigger a feeling of sadness and hopelessness. So the things to watch out for would be changes in eating and sleeping patterns, not enjoying the things you used to do. And I think humans all go through that in our lives. We're all going to have a period where we go through that. Doesn't mean you have depression. You can be sad for a bit and then figure out a way to get out of it. If it's longer than a month or so, then you want to worry.
Are teenagers also facing, like, even so let's not talk about teenagers, but like younger children also facing depression in some way?
So depression in younger kids is a bit tricky because kids they can be depressed, but they don't show it the same way. So it's very interesting. So all those symptoms I'm talking about are a lot in older kids and teens and adults. For younger kids, you're looking for irritability, being upset, not wanting to do things, maybe not wanting to go to school, and just a change in behavior. So then you have to see what's triggering that in the environment. So depression and anxiety look very different in kids than in adults.
So how do you ensure continuity of care and in families? How do you do that?
So I work with the family for a certain number of time. Obviously, I can't work with them forever, but what I do is we do like a check-in every couple of months then, or I always tell them if you hit a bump in the road and something's going on, you can always check in with me. And I also provide a lot of resources.
Okay.
So I can't be around all the time. So there's so many resources now. There's books and podcasts and things. And a lot of parents, if they're open to that, they really educate themselves.
Yeah.
And I kind of help them with that. Oh, okay, I'm going through this. Okay, here's a good resource. So this is what you should do or say.
Okay. If you were creating a perfect family, okay? So what would the painting look like? What would the children look like if someone goes through a dip or whatever? What would you do?
Wow, that's a tough question because I don't think there's a perfect family.
There can never be.
You can ask my kids that I've probably yelled at them too, and then I've apologized right away.
Yeah.
So the perfect family is not about what you do because you'll make mistakes. It's about repairing. So the perfect family would have connection. And it doesn't mean you always have to be doing things with your kids. It means you're always present, fully present. When they're talking to you, you're listening, you're engaged, you're curious about them, and you do things as a family. So you have family things that you do together, traditions and things like that, and kind of creating that environment where I think the most important thing is that parent-child connection. So if you can make sure that you are connected with your child where they can come to you when they're upset or stressed, they will come to you when they're adults too. So otherwise what happens is when they no longer need us, are they going to come to us? Yeah. So a lot of kids, they're older, they're independent, they've moved away. Are they in touch with their parents? You want to make sure that connection lasts.
Okay.
So I think, and that connection looks different for different families, but making sure that you're connected with your kids, you're aware of what's going on in their lives, you're curious, and you're listening.
Do children really want to come to their parents as adults? Because like right now, I feel that given the pace of change of the world, it's so very difficult because obviously parents don't change that quickly or accept changes to the world that quickly. Even in terms of when we were talking about teenagers, about talking about grades and going into doctor, engineer, lawyer route or whatever. While there's just so many things that you can do right now. So this gap will always remain, which means that unless you are just like the most updated person on the world, there's always going to be that gap, right? I mean, there are things that traditional wisdom would not really understand because of the pace of change of the world. So how do we actually bridge that gap, given that children are generally seen as beings who don't know that much, or their brain is not developed enough and all of that, so whatever decision they may be making may seem brilliant to them, but it may not be that brilliant in the real sense. So how do you bridge that?
I think you can't all the time, and it's okay for a parent to say, hey, I might have made a mistake, or I might have done this and it wasn't the right thing to do, and I'm sorry that you felt that way. I'm trying to do things differently. But the main thing is I think a part of you will still connect with your parents in that there's still a comfort zone for you, and they should be.
Yeah.
Even if they have traditional views or something, the connection could still be there. And the parents could, I think, do the best they can. At least they're trying. If they're trying, I think kids know that. Versus
Do they?
Some don't. Some don't. Some are very like, this is the way it is. This is how I was brought up, and I turned out fine, and I'm perfect, and I don't need to change anything. And so it's some people are like that, and we can't do anything about that.
How important is apologizing and rather first acknowledging that you made a mistake as an adult or as a parent, and how important is apologizing to your children if you made a mistake?
So when you apologize to your kids, one, you're showing them that you're teaching them how to apologize. So if someone says sorry to them, they realize, hey, it's okay to make mistakes, and I can also apologize. And second, that you are trying, that you're not perfect, but you're trying, and that you're really giving it an effort. If you just say you yell or you do something and you don't apologize, that creates a disconnect or a rupture in the relationship. You have to go back and repair that. If you don't, then your kids aren't going to apologize to you then.
Yeah.
So so it's the same for respect. If you want your kids to respect you, you have to respect them first.
Yeah.
They're little, so they're learning from you. So a lot of parents demand respect.
Yeah.
You can't demand it unless you teach it and model it and show it. So showing respect to kids is asking them their consent, asking them things nicely, not forcing them to do anything, and really just treating them like human beings, like little human beings. But
yeah, I think with accepting mistakes, it's also the fact that you show yourself to be human.
Yeah.
So like what I've realized, like even when you go out and make friends, right? If you come from a place where you're impenetrable or invulnerable, and you do everything perfectly and all of that, the other person might not feel the same way, and they might be looking for some chink in the armor, some vulnerability that they might want to connect on. So like even in terms of like whatever deep friendships that I have, they're all built on vulnerabilities, because you show yourself to be vulnerable, they show themselves to be vulnerable, and then that sort of connection happens where you're like tum bhi aisi ho. It's okay. But if there's someone who's coming from a place of I'm perfect, I don't take a step wrong, I think in that scenario those people don't really end up with a lot of friends, because they it's always like coming from a place of judgment, or coming from a place of कि मैं अगर तुम्हारी जगह होता तो मैं ये कर लेता या वो कर लेता, which is never truly the case. Is that also important to for parents to show some sort of vulnerability to their children?
Absolutely. So we with social emotional learning and emotion regulation, we tell parents that it's okay for you to tell your kids, hey, I'm having a bad day, I'm kind of feeling sad, and here's what I'm going to do today, or I'm feeling angry, I'm feeling upset. They have to know that it's okay to be upset, sad, frustrated, angry, and they're watching how you're dealing with it.
Okay.
So I will tell my kids, I'm having a really hard day, I'm going to take 10 minutes and I'm just going to read by myself.
Okay.
Instead of like, I'm perfect, I'm never upset, I'm almost always fine, I'm always fine. Or if I have yelled at them, I will say, for the little one, because he's little, I'll say, Mama was having a big feeling, and I was not feeling okay and I'm sorry. I'm going to take 5 minutes and I'm going to come back.
Okay.
For the older ones, I'll explain, look, I was stuck in traffic for 20 minutes. I'm feeling a little stressed. I'm just going to relax for a little bit.
Okay.
So that you're showing your human side.
I think that is really, really important because like even my personal experience was like I couldn't see my father as not a superhero till I saw him fall. And that sort of changed a lot of perspectives. Like that was the day I think I grew up because I could see कि अच्छा यार मतलब इधर भी गलतियां होती हैं. It's okay, right? So and I think that sort of made us closer as well in a sense because you know I could it's like becoming someone's confidant, right? Even in the it's more of a religious sort of an example. So we've all heard about the story of Ghazwa Ohud, in which you know the archers they you know abandoned their positions and all of that. So obviously, when all of those people went back, they were pretty petrified, you know, because obviously the Prophet was you know injured and all of that. So when the revelation came to fix matters with those people, it was very interesting what the Quran says. The Quran says, "Go ask advice from them." So it was not that you know you just apologize. You know they should just apologize. It's okay. They like you know to fix the you know the gap that has come. You need to go and ask advice from those people, even though the Prophet didn't really need advice. So I think, and that was sort of the way to tell that if there is a you know if there's a broken relationship or a broken friendship or whatever, and you want to mend things up. So I think involving them into your own lives and you know giving them importance that you know you're still important to me, you can still give me advice and I'll take that advice. I think that sort of meant a lot of you know things. So even if I'm not saying that you know parents go ask for advice and anything, but I'm just saying like you know becoming their confidant, you know, becoming where they can come and tell about their mistakes and you can come and tell your mistakes will create a bond that's you know built on mistakes essentially, and that's I think stronger than any kisses and hugs and all of that like later on in life.
Yeah, and sharing mistakes makes you connect emotionally, and kids feel safe. I can share my mistake and not be judged or criticized. I have a safe place to share my things. So I think that message to kids is whatever it is, we can figure it out together. So that's a major thing.
Thank you so much, Sabahat. We've already talked about 45 minutes.
Wow,
it's great. Yeah, it's if there's anything that I missed out or you want to add to millions of my subscribers, this is your chance.
Inshallah. I think that I just don't know if there's anything to add. I think we talked about a lot. I think what it comes down to, I think at the end, if we talk about child development and parenting and all that, is just to keep that connection with your children and prioritize them. And if there's something that's getting in the way, ask yourself as a parent, what is it about me or is it about them? I think there's a lot of times that it's about the parent. So if there's something you want to change in your child, is this about them or is this about me? And a lot of times, if we figure it out in ourselves, we have so many triggers as parents. So figuring out our triggers and working on ourselves first before we become parents. That's the ideal situation.
It's the same, like be the change you want to see in the world. Essentially,
Essentially, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.